Sorry, I have a disturbance here. Yeah, and what Atma does is helps the NGOs in building capacity, creating systems and processes to solve their organization development issues. Atma started their journey in 2007 and since then has supported more than 80 organizations in the journey of excellence. At Atma, we understand the importance of shared knowledge, especially in a sector like ours where resources are limited. Therefore, these webinar series were started as a space to share our perspectives, learnings, and ideas about the issues and dilemmas that the NGOs face daily. The Atma webinar is a curated platform where speakers share their practical experiences that could benefit other NGOs. The topics that we have move from human resource management to program management, finance, policies, and any other pressing topics that are affecting the sector as a whole. In today's webinar, we are going to be taking a closer and a deeper look at communication strategies and how to make the most of this function. During the webinar, what you will be able to do is understand the process of crafting a thorough communication strategy, creation of social media calendars and effectively implementing them, leveraging communications for fundraising and sustainability, and making communications your priority. This is communications here is not just something that will help you to make all these changes within your organization. I would like to invite Shrikant Ayyangar. He is the lead communications at Mission for Vision. He spearheads the communication and branding activities at Mission for Vision. He has more than 15 years experience in communications for development sector organizations and digital agencies. And in this includes strategic communications, branding, social media marketing, content management, and public relations. Shrikant has a bachelor's degree in commerce and a diploma in public relations and advertising from the Wellinkar Institute of Management Studies. Before handing it over to Shrikant to start the webinar, what I would like to do is recap a few basic rules. All attendees, please stay muted throughout the webinar. Any questions that you have will be taken up during the Q&A section towards the end of the webinar. So if you have questions, please put it into the chat box that you will be seeing on your screen. Also, I would request you to keep a pen, paper handy for taking any essential notes. This will be an interactive webinar, so please stay close to your phones, laptops, and tablets and participate. And please keep your videos on as far as possible because that's a nice way for all of us to interact. And one important thing that I'd like to wind up is that after the session, I'll be providing you a link to update the feedback on the webinar. And also we will be providing you a video recording of this session. Thank you very much. Shrikant, I hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Sunita. That was a lovely introduction. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining in. When the Atma team actually told me before that, 3 o'clock is the timing for the webinar, I was like thinking that, this is a very precarious timing, and especially post lunch, the moods do dip down. But I'll try my best to keep it as interactive as possible and ensure that, you stay awake throughout this webinar. So just in terms of the flow of the particular the webinar right now, I'm going to keep it as interactive as possible, though I'm using a presentation right now. That is mainly for just to, share a couple of templates, certain examples, and just lead you through the conversation through that. And this is also actually a follow-up webinar. Riva from Atma had conducted a webinar 2 months back, which was specifically touching upon different aspects of communications. So this is where this particular webinar, you'll be having a deep dive as such, which is why it's titled specifically as communications, a deep dive. So we'll be looking into the nitty-gritties and ensuring that you learn and make the best out of this particular function. So moving on. So this is a format of the webinar. Of course, like we'll be learning more about the communication strategy. What does it entail in terms of the social media strategy, and how do you sort of leverage communications for fundraising? And it's not just me who will be speaking for this webinar. We will hear from other communications professionals as well who have joined us for this webinar. And lastly, of course, making communications a priority. So this is something I'll be sharing a couple of ideas and how do we go about it. So first thing first, I mean, as a part of the Future Impact Collaborator, which is a mentorship program led by Atma, I'm often asked this particular question, saying that how do we start off with preparing a comm strategy? I mean, this is something that's as simple as it can be, but again, it baffles many of us to understand where do we begin, where do we start from that. So this is where you'll start off with. So first thing first, in terms of the comm strategy, what you need to be looking at, which is the basic structure. First thing first, you'll be looking at the objective and the aim of the function as a whole, which ties into your organization as well. So look at it from a perspective, say, for example, if you're looking at retail giving or bringing more of attention to the branding of the organization, or you're growing the organization, or maybe you're looking at the advocacy aspects of it, or the research aspects of it, or the policy change. All of this will be a part of your objective as a whole. Now, once that has been set in place, what you will be looking at is trickling it down to different platforms or the mediums that you will be using. So it's not necessary that you have to be a part of all the platforms. You can pick and choose what suits you the best, and then you'll go on with that. For example, a research-based organization or an organization that purely looks at the advocacy or the policy change levels may not necessarily focus on social media or the digital marketing pieces. So you can always look at the media publications or certain serious publications that you're looking at. So that is where you will be using the platforms according to that. Now, once you've selected the platforms, once you've started implementing these objectives, what will happen is, first thing first, what we do is our instant mindset is to look at the measurables and the quantitative aspects of it. This is where often we mistake, and we ensure that we're not having like a complete picture of how we are performing well. So you need to look at both the quantitative and the qualitative aspects. I will be sharing more examples of how you can sort of measure both the aspects, and how you can come up with the metrics and the expected outcome, which all ties in back to the entire chain of from the objectives to the platform and then the expected outcome. Then moving on, in terms of the other key components when it comes to comm strategy, first thing first, we need to remember who are our target audiences. What is the demographics that we're looking at? What kind of geographies we're looking at? So this needs to be detailed out in your strategy so that you are very clear about what are some of the areas that you're looking at. Is it donor communication? Is it specifically mass communication? Are you looking at raising a voice for a particular cause? What is it exactly that you're aiming for? And based on that, you will be sort of putting together the target audiences and be as detailed as possible through this particular activity, so that it ensures that you have an effective implementation right from the start to the end. Then look at the budgets as well. So this is something very important and we often miss out while chalking out strategies. And some may even say that, budgets, it's quite still premature in terms of if you're looking at a strategy that's for 5 years from now, you might say that, budgets, it's too preliminary, it's too premature to sort of set in place. But again, having said that, what happens is, say, for example, if you're looking at a website redevelopment, or maybe you're looking at some sort of a technology integration, maybe it could be something on the virtual reality pieces or something more advanced. In that case, budgets come into play. So you need to ensure that you have your budget set within the strategy itself, so that you have a clear idea about what to expect from here till 5 years from now on. And like I've been mentioning, so 5 years is a plan that you need to look at, especially in terms of a strategy. So that's a good sort of a timeline that you can look at. And when it comes to the methodologies, what you can be looking at is, first thing first, you need to look at a couple of different options and a variety of ways that you will disseminate the information. Looking at the campaigns is a wonderful idea. You can look at campaign-centric approaches wherein you can either create your own campaign of your own, or you can also piggyback on other sort of campaigns that are running currently. Like for example, the International Day of the Girl Child. Now, this is something that's been initiated by the Canadian consulate. But again, it doesn't necessarily mean that the consulate is the one who's holding it together, because there are other parties involved, other organizations that take part in this. And there is more of ownership through that whole particular campaign-centric approach. Now, how do we sort of ensure that we have a better sort of a buy-in, especially coming in from the audiences that we're looking at? Now, there will be a subtle amount of branding and the promotion and also the thought leadership aspects will come into play when it's coming to the campaigns that you're running across, when you're piggybacking with other organizations. So there will be definitely part where you are getting noticed, you are getting the attention. So that way it's a good call to take. But again, if you feel that you are comfortable and you have reached a particular position that you feel like you're planning to initiate a campaign of your own, you can feel free to do that as well. So this is where you'll sort of bring in the campaign-centric approach. So it could be both internal, basically by internal, I mean that it could be more of brand focused, wherein you're basically promoting your brand, ensuring that your thought leadership pieces and all those things do go out. And when I mention external sort of campaigns, you can piggyback to other campaigns that are already existing in the industry. So you can sort of campaign and latch onto those pieces. And then, of course, it's important to sort of have a couple of regular updates, maybe creating a couple of hashtags of particular campaigns that are running on a regular basis. For example, at Mission for Vision, we have this particular two different hashtags, which is Wednesday Wisdom and a Friday Flash, when we are sort of promoting information and educating the audience about certain things about eye health, and ensuring that we are also sort of plugging in a couple of pieces which are towards the retail giving aspects as well. So just ensuring that there are regular updates, as well as it's a good mix of campaigns that you're running, which is cohesive in terms of campaign that you're looking at, and regular updates will be a regular of activities, so that the audience also registers that this is something that I can expect on a particular day, or something from an organization that I can regularly get an update from. And also with the ad hoc requests, there will be some of them which we cannot avoid definitely. So you need to factor in those aspects as well. So just add in a couple of ad hoc tasks which are a part of your strategy as well, overall strategy, so that you have a clear picture saying that it's not just these pre-planned items, but we also have a couple of ad hoc pieces that will come into play. And lastly, the other piece, the most vital piece, is the crisis communication. Now, when we say crisis communication, most often than not, like especially the nonprofit or the development sector, we feel that crisis communication is not a must-have, but it's a big mistake that we do if we do not include crisis communication as a part of our strategy. Now, why do I say that? Is because, say for example, something goes wrong. Maybe a staff member who has been very irate and who has not been happy with the organization, and he or she has left the organization and then writes out a scathing letter to the media saying that this is the organization, this is a bad organization, and so on and so forth. In that case, that itself is a crisis for the organization. You have been trolled, or you may have had a certain sort of industry that has gone wrong, or something that has gone wrong. So in that case, you need to be well prepared in terms of what do we do in terms of crisis communication. Have a particular plan B ready. Have a list of leaders or the leadership of the organization. Have them prepped beforehand to say what they have to say, and also keep like press release and other sort of pieces ready in the back end. But you will just activate it at the time of need. So hopefully, I'm hoping that it's not a requirement as such for any organization, but it's a good to have definitely. So do include that as a part of your strategy. Now, moving forward in terms of the other sort of components or the structure of the comms strategy. So this is broadly divided into a couple of pieces. First is the operational plan that you'll be looking at, which is a mix of inputs and activities. Then you will look at the metrics. You will look at the movement of the audience, and also a couple of pieces where you'll be looking at the expected outcome. Now, when we're looking at the operational plan, for example, you need to list down a couple of measurables over here. Towards your left-hand side, you would see that there are a couple of updates and categories listed down. This is a website or Facebook, Twitter. So this can be, of course, customized as per each organization. But what you need to do is you need to specifically mention that this is the amount of pieces that I'm looking at. So, for example, if it's a blog update, it should be like one blog per month, or a guest contribution, one blog twice a month, or something on those lines. So you need to ensure that you have a clear-cut idea about what to expect from the comms function as a whole, so that you have a clear streamlined structure to ensure that the organization as well as the external people do know that this is something that is coming their way, and this is something that the comms team is working on. So it could also be drill down to the Facebook pieces, the Twitter campaigns. What are you looking at in terms of YouTube, if you have a YouTube account? Then also the Instagram pieces, the LinkedIn. All of this needs to be included and detailed out as much as possible. So this is, of course, the digital part of it on the left-hand side. Now, looking at from the offline or the print perspective towards the right, you would see that there are annual reports, brochures, white papers, leaflets, banners, even the media interactions or other videos that you're promoting. Now, this is where it's important for you to include these parts as well, because we all know that there is an annual report that is going to go out at a particular period of time. We also know that there will be a brochure that we develop for the organization at some point or the other. And of course, there are media and press interactions that are going to happen. How do you streamline this process? Now, for example, you need to sort of set certain timelines in place. Example, like a media or a press interaction, you need to set up certain inputs that will give you the outputs, right? I mean, media doesn't come back to you directly. You need to sort of ensure that you're setting up the media meetings. You are compiling press releases and sending out for certain campaigns. You're also exploring contributions or certain blog pieces that you would like to explore. And all in all, you're creating a database of all these journalists. So looking at it in the format where you have X, Y, and Z, like point number one, point number two. So you need to ensure that this is an operational plan, and this needs to go like clockwork. On a month-on-month basis, this needs to be reviewed to ensure that you are on track. You are ensuring that all the activities are in place. And based on that, what you will be doing is you will be looking at the metrics aspect of it. Now, when we're looking at the metrics, like I mentioned before, there is a quantitative aspect, there is a qualitative aspect. Now, when we're looking at qualitative, often the question that has been asked is that, how do I measure qualitative pieces, right? And this is exactly how you'll be doing it. For example, like the brand awareness part of it. Now, if you're looking at the brand awareness or the growth part of it, of course, there is no measurable or a number that I can point to. But again, from a standpoint that if you have a brand survey that's been done, either through an agency or through a form that's been generated internally, which has been passed on to your partners, donors, and other sort of external stakeholders, you will get a fair sense, or it'll be a good dipstick for you to understand, saying that, this is how my brand is performing and this is how my brand is being viewed, so that you get a clear understanding that this is where we are at and this is where we need to go. So coming back to the other sort of measurables, which is website, of course, it's a no-brainer, especially in terms of quantitative, that website visits, the leads generated through the website. So all those things are quantitative. Now, when we're looking at the qualitative aspects, you need to look at the comments, the interaction, the engagement that is being taking place. For example, like Twitter, for that matter. Twitter is a pure play engagement platform. You need to ensure that you're tracking all the retweets, the comments, all of these things that do come about. You need to track this. You need to ensure that, say, for example, if you've posted something on the donor communication front, and you've thanked the donor and you've posted something online, in that case, say a CSR head or someone on LinkedIn reposts or reshares it, that is something, a qualitative piece that you need to keep in mind, you need to record and ensure that you have that as a ready reckoner at the end of the year. So end of every financial year or calendar year, you can collect all this information and just track to see where you are at. Then looking at the movement of audience. Now, this is again a slightly gray area or tricky to sort of understand because this is highly dependent on qualitative aspects. Now, when we're looking at different sort of donor category or the audience categories, which could be donors, CSR, maybe partners, the media. So all of this needs to be divided into different sort of segments. Now, it could be like, say, I'm taking an example of a media. So it could be a regional media or maybe a media that we have never contacted as an organization. In that case, of course, I'll bucket them under unaware. In case they have been aware about us, they've probably spoken to us, but again, they've not mentioned any of us in the media. So in that case, they will be considered as an observer. Now, if you're looking at a supporter in the media section, so supporters would be somebody maybe who has promoted some of your events or fundraising activity or something on those lines. And again, advocates would be something more at a policy level or a thought leadership level where they have a series of articles that are going on. So this is how you'll divide all these different audience categories and ensure that you have the movement of audience. I mean, not necessary that everybody needs to move towards advocates, because there would be a certain category that will still stick at maybe observers for that matter. I mean, I wouldn't want anybody to stick under unaware, but definitely observers is something that you can look at. So you can look at all these aspects, and most importantly, I think it's important to define these audience categories based on your organization requirement. This is of course a template. It's not set in stone. You can always customize it and define the kind of audience movement you're looking at. You could look at it qualitative aspects as well. You could look at the quantitative aspects as well, and then define all these particular aspects of it, and then ensure that you're moving the audience from unaware to at least an observer or a supporter level. So this is how you'll be processing all these pieces. Now, looking at the social media strategy, I think you can actually devise this particular social media strategy within your overall communications piece, or you can create a separate one that is more detailed, and you can ensure that you have more sort of a streamlined process in place so that it avoids the clutter on the main strategy, but again, you have a detailed sort of plan elsewhere. And like I said before, right, I mean, you need not be present on all the platforms. There are a variety of social media platforms. You can pick and choose what suits you the best and what works well for you. So I know a lot of organizations who are not on Twitter. Maybe I know a lot of organizations who are not on Instagram. So that's absolutely fine. You need not be present on all the platforms. You can pick and choose what works best for you, and where are your stakeholders, more importantly, because you also need to look at, from the donor perspective and also from a partner perspective, look at where your stakeholders and partners are, and based on that, take a call. Then looking at the other sort of key areas when you're looking at the social media strategy. First thing first, what we need to look at is looking at a social media calendar that includes all the important dates. It includes all the different campaign ideas that you've worked on, and also looking at what are some of the dates that you definitely need to sort of have certain pieces up there, like the regular updates that I spoke about, maybe the hashtags and certain things. So you have a clear idea that there is no overlap, there is not too much of a bombarding on social media channels, and you're clearly sort of streamlining the processes to ensure that it goes through one after the other. Now, looking at the content that you'll be posting on social media, it's a very critical step when it comes to this. Now, you need to look at what's the value add for the audience, because these days the audience has become, I mean, for the lack of a better word, selfish to some extent, because they do need a value add in terms of what they're looking for. It could be either an educational piece or an entertainment value. Either of the two needs to be included within your content. So when I mean educational, it should be something more on the lines of you're passing on the information which is valuable to them. again, going by example for mission for vision. Now, eye care is something that we're looking at, but again, I can't promote a particular program directly. In that case, what I need to do is I will need to ensure that I'm sort of subtly promoting the brand as such, but I'm promoting more from how to care for your eyes. What is the 20-20-20 rule? What are some of the areas that you need to look at? If you have diabetes, get your eyes checked. So all these very simple and easy to sort of grasp information that goes out in terms of the social media posts. But again, at the end of it, there is a liner or a small little line which says about the program by itself. What are the programs that the organization has been running? So that there is a subtle plug-in in terms of the branding and what you're trying to sort of work on. So there is an educational aspect. Of course, the entertainment aspect is something that you can also look at. There are quite a few organizations that have taken a bold move at using the entertainment value as such. Maybe fun reels, fun videos. They've been doing a lot of things. Of course, it's not as common in terms of the development sector, but again, from the overall sector piece, there are a lot of pieces which do take in the entertainment value and then ensure that their social media is going smoothly. And lastly, of course, at the engagement approach for every single social media. So that's why I said specifically pick and choose the social media platform that you're going to be active on, because you need to be responsive to every single message, every single comment, put in a timeline specifically that this is the timeline that you will be responding to certain messages, because some platforms do have a mechanism which have algorithms which say that this particular organization responds within a particular time. So Facebook, for that matter, does that. So clearly that this is an organization that is quite responsive, and in that way also it sort of helps with the growth overall. So you're sure that there is a good engagement approach, an interactive approach. It's not just throwing out information to the audience and letting them grasp it. It's more about a two-way conversation that you're having with them. So that is the most important piece. The other sort of piece of it, which is I want to touch upon based on the last webinar, is about the LinkedIn aspect of it. There were a lot of questions and there was a lot of inputs requested specifically on LinkedIn. Now, most often than not, we take the traditional route of ensuring that we're present on Facebook, Twitter, or maybe even Instagram for that matter. But LinkedIn is often sidelined because most organizations feel that, what do I promote? I mean, how do I promote campaigns? How do I promote a casual tone or a language? That's nothing like, it's not as complex as it looks like, but it's very simple. So what you can do is you can definitely use LinkedIn for a variety of pieces, right? From your donor communication, you can look at it from a standpoint of engagement or the announcements or any milestones that your organization has achieved. So this needs to be a key component when it comes to crafting the entire social media strategy. You need to ensure that there is a steady amount of posts that are going on LinkedIn. And like I said about the engagement aspects of it, this needs to be a part of the entire engagement process. So while you're chalking out the strategies and chalking out the calendar, this needs to be taken into consideration. And speaking of chalking out calendars and social media strategies, I have Shruti with me, who is the Executive Resources and Communications for Muktangan. So Shruti and I and the Muktangan team overall, we've worked on the crafting a social media strategy. And we'll be sort of having a discussion about, what are some of the things that we looked at and how is it that you will be able to implement some of these pieces. So Shruti, welcome.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shrikant, and thank you to the Atma team for giving us this opportunity through this webinar. We're really happy to be a part of this.
Great. Thank you so much for making time for this. Shruti, before I begin, I mean, we have been discussing about the idea about the whole mentorship program. We were very clear that, social media strategy and crafting all these, social media calendars was our focus area. Now, if you could just share a couple of ideas or maybe a step-by-step guide, how do we go about it? And, how do you ensure that, there's an effective implementation from the start to the end? Maybe if you can just give us a glimpse into that, that'll be great.
Yes. So I think firstly, I'd like to set the context for this question. So Muktangan, basically, we are an organization based in Mumbai, and we uh, provide education opportunities to children in Mumbai's G South ward. And that's our prime focus. And we do this through an integrated teacher and school education module. And we also have an outreach program through which we reach out to other partner schools and other like minded organizations. So basically, the need arose when we realized that through a survey which we had conducted, we realized that a lot of our external stakeholders were not really aware of our social media presence, in the sense that they did know we exist on these platforms. They knew a little bit about our work, but they were not fully engaged or aware of what we are doing across these platforms. And we also realized that we need to involve the team, the program team, the external stakeholders a lot more in this process. And through that need, we started this entire journey. And as they say, I think things come together when they have to. We got this mentorship opportunity. And with your guidance, Mr. Shrikant, this has been a wonderful journey. Uh, Initially, I think we were all very confused. We had a lot of apprehensions of where do we actually begin? What will be our starting point? And we established a core communications team, um, which was a very holistic team. We had members from the program team, we had the resources team involved, and we did a lot of brainstorming sessions on how we could begin this process. And in the mentorship program, we came to know about the social media calendar, and that became our starting point. And I think the first thing that we considered was what are our aims and objectives. Firstly, what is it that we want to communicate about our program? What are some of the broad content areas that we are going to touch upon? So for example, we're looking at case studies of children, we're looking at case studies of teachers, how they have grown, how they have climbed the ladder of success at teaching in Muktangan. We have looked at alumni students sharing their stories and testimonies on our social media platforms. So we were looking at broad content areas that we could communicate and weave into the social media calendar. We looked at the technical aspects for each platform. So, as Mr. Shrikant shared in his presentation, we did not jump onto the bandwagon and start planning for all the platforms at once. We took one step at a time. We started with Instagram and Facebook. We created a good strategy for these two platforms initially. We set the frequency that we are going to share every day on Instagram. That became our frequency for Instagram. And for Facebook, we said, okay, let's share thrice a week on Facebook. And we decided these are the content areas for Instagram, these are going to be the content areas for Facebook. uh, the other thing also we considered was the audience across each of these platforms, and I think that's where the analytics plays such a crucial role, because that really gave us an insight into the demographics across each of these platforms. So we realized that on Instagram, a lot of the audience we have are between the ages of, say, in their early 20s. So, and a lot of our alumni students are very active on Instagram, and we realize that that's what we need to tap into when we are planning this social media calendar. Whereas on Facebook, we have a slightly older audience. We have our parents who are more active on Facebook and on YouTube, and we started creating content accordingly. So I think these are some of the very, very crucial steps while planning a social media calendar. Um, and the other thing is to constantly observe while we are implementing. We also need to keep observing and seeing what is it that is working and what is it that we need to modify or improve, because it once the calendar is crafted, it does not mean that there is no scope for change. After 2 months, you might feel that there are some areas that are very successful. Maybe your case studies, for example, are doing really well, but maybe your programmatic updates, you still need to work on the content. Maybe it's too informative and it's not engaging enough. So I think when you constantly observe, note down your observations, keep reviewing the analytics and the calendar as well, I think that will really help in progressing.
No, you rightly pointed that out. I think it's important to sort of look at it from a perspective that okay, this is working and this is not working, and it's definitely not set in stone as such. I mean, you can obviously relook at it after 2 months' time or maybe 3 months, and just look at it what works for you and what doesn't. So that's wonderful. Shruti, also just wanted to understand any particular challenges that you faced through this process. I mean, while implementing it.
Yes. So in terms of the challenges, there were a couple of challenges. So I think the first challenge that we faced was how do we streamline the process of content coordination? Because we are a very large organization, we have so many different programs, we have so many different departments. To ensure that we maintain this consistency across all our platforms, if we are saying that every day we need to post something on Instagram, we also need to make sure that we get the content from the respective teams. We ensure that there's a smooth process in place. And I think that the involvement of the program team, and we have really together developed this whole calendar. I think that's very important, that the communication strategy is not just for the communications team, but it is an effort of the entire organization. And that's what makes it so wonderful, because the entire organization comes together to drive this process. And so that was one challenge which we could overcome, with constant engagement with the program team. They would give us inputs, their suggestions, their ideas, as to how we could make this a smoother process. And I think we've in these last few months we've really seen a marked difference in the way we are communicating on social media. So that was one challenge which we could overcome. The second challenge, as we discussed earlier, was to constantly observe what is working and what is not working. And for example, on Instagram, for the engagement part of it, I realized that through my observations that question and answers were not gaining as much engagement as, say, sliders, or yes and no polls, or quizzes. They were getting a lot more engagement. People were, because it doesn't take much to select a yes or a no, but when you ask a particular question and they have to type in an answer to that, I think the engagement rate was slightly going lower as what we expected. So these are some minor observations. And when you constantly keep noting these down, you will understand what is really working, what is not working. Uh, and I think the final challenge was, how do we create a fine line between content that is informative and engaging at the same time? Because sometimes the content can become too information heavy, and that might not make it so interesting for a reader. Say, if we are talking about, we want to communicate, say, for example, about how parental engagement is very important for a child's development. But if I'm only giving you factual information, it again does not add value to you. The value add would be, okay, how do you engage with your child in the house now during, say, the pandemic? How can you help your child develop their socio emotional skills at home? So then there is a value add. Then you would engage a lot more with the content. So these are some areas. I think initially when we started off, we were not very sure of it, but through this entire journey of the mentorship program, uh, we could really tap into these challenges and come up with solutions together as a team.
Wonderful. I think there were a lot of key takeaways through that. I mean, specifically, I like the point which you mentioned about, it's not just the onus doesn't lie with the comms team itself. I mean, everybody needs to come together. It's all other departments who need to contribute to the entire exercise. It's not just one person, because typically comms teams do have just a single resource within their organizations. This is where, we need all the support from other sort of departments as well. Speaking of that, I mean, what I wanted to know from you is that whether any particular apprehensions or anything specific in terms from an organization perspective, where you felt that this is something that we wouldn't look at, or maybe this is something that we definitely need to look at.
Yes. So we were very apprehensive about Twitter, because that was one platform where we were not very sure as to how much we want to be involved in it, or whether we really want to be involved in it. So initially, when we started the process of coming together with this social media calendar and really strengthening, so our first focus was on setting processes in place, strengthening the entire process. And I think we have a wonderful program team, and they are so involved, and they are so forthcoming, and they're very proactive with all their feedback and their ideas. And that's really what has gotten us to this point where we are at. And initially, yes, we were very apprehensive about Twitter. We were not sure about what to expect. So we looked at other platforms like Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. These were the platforms we looked at. However, now we feel that we are at a stage with a lot of technical inputs. We are a little more aware. And now we feel that we can venture out into Twitter as well. And we are already in the process of creating a strategy for Twitter.
So that's great. Just looking at it from, concluding this conversation, just wanted to understand from you, how has the growth trajectory been so far? I mean, right from the time that we did not have a social media strategy in place, and now that we have a perfectly, robust strategy in set in motion, how has the growth been so far?
I think that we can really actually trace the journey of growth in many areas. So I would say first is, of course, the obvious, that we have come up with the social media calendar. We now know how to streamline this process. That also equips us with the skills of being more planned. We are aware, like you said, the important dates. It's there in the calendar that in December, these are the dates, these are the posts that have to go out. In terms of the campaign, we've started running our campaign also. We did one campaign, which is a smaller campaign just to start off. We started sharing case studies of our SSC students who had passed out. We started sharing their case studies, and their case studies in terms of how they have grown as students throughout this journey. And I think that got a lot of engagement. We had a lot of people who commented saying that, your content is engaging and we really like reading these stories. So these are some of the qualitative aspects that we could see. In terms of the quantitative aspects, yes, we have increased even in terms of our numbers. For example, on Instagram, we are seeing a follower growth. A lot of people are reacting to our posts now. There are more likes that we are getting. People are engaging with us in terms of, personal messages. They send that, they react to some of our stories. So there is that quantitative aspect also in place, and the analytics also show that a lot of people are now saving our posts, which is also something that is, it shows that there is an interest in the content. It's not just the likes and the shares, but it's also that people are saving your posts. So that means it is on some level resonating with the audience. So yes, we have definitely grown in these areas. The other area where we have grown is we have established this feedback loop, which is also very important. uh, with the other teams in the organization, there is a constant feedback loop. Even I think in this whole mentorship process, we've also had a great feedback loop with Mr. Shrikant. Anything we would plan, we would present it before Mr. Shrikant, and he would give us his inputs. And similarly with the core communications team, with our program team, and everyone would share what they think of it, and then that really helps us in creating a foolproof plan, as they say. So even in that area we have progressed, where we have now streamlined this process to a great extent. And I think that over the last couple of months, uh, we have reached a place where now we know, how to progress forward. So even the campaign that we are running, we started with just 1 month. Now we are saying, okay, we could do it for 3 months, because we have that technical inputs, we have the skills now. We are constantly interacting with each other, so there also there is a journey of growth. And also in terms of content, initially when we started sharing, our focus was more on getting all these processes in place. But now we also reviewed the content. We saw, okay, is this information heavy? Is this too, is it too much for a reader to take in? And then we had workshops, writing workshops with Miss Zareen Virji, and she guided us on how we could, be more creative in terms of our writing. Because often we forget that the caption also plays a really crucial role in the post, and we have to see what value our captions are also adding to the overall communications. And then that workshop really helped us understand how we could make the content informative and at the same time very engaging for the reader. And I think to conclude, I would like to say that it's so important to have regular surveys. You know, you brought up this point of having surveys. We did conduct a quarterly survey to just to understand where we are going. We have a very strong internal team strength, and we circulated this survey form, and we wanted to know, okay, what are the areas where we could further improve? Is it in terms of our videos, in terms of the content we are sharing? Is it engaging? Is it too information heavy? So all these points we raised in that survey form, and that has also given us a clear path forward now. So this point that you have brought up of the survey is, I think, very, very crucial and vital for all organizations to adopt into their communications.
I agree. I was about to ask about the same thing because I know that Muktangan did a complete survey internally as well as externally as well. So that was really useful as an organization to understand where we are at in terms of the brand growth. So that's wonderful to know. I mean, thank you for sharing that. And also, it's quite heartening to see that, one thing that I've seen as an organization also, you have been quite experimentative. I mean, of course, there are limits to how much an organization or a company page can be experimentative. But again, you have seen that. I mean, that is something that you've looked at, ensuring that, this is the kind of content styles that do work in. Like in terms of when we set in the calendar in place, one important aspect is that you tried and tested. First you see that how is the content faring, and then based on that you sort of set it into the calendars. So that is one thing important to highlight, and this is something that will be a good key takeaway for everybody else too. Thank you so much, Shruti, for highlighting. I mean, I hope you stay for the Q&A section because I do see that a couple of questions have come in, so we'll be getting
Sure.
that soon. Yeah,
Thank you so much.
thank you. Okay, so moving on with the last leg or the extension of this particular webinar, one is looking at leveraging communication specifically for fundraising or sustainability. Now, this is a very key component when it comes to comms and fundraising go hand in hand. But though one point to note is that they both run on parallel lines altogether. So this is where you need to ensure that there's a clear line of difference wherein you understand that this is where comms will play a role in terms of fundraising. And in some cases, of course, you do have the comms and the fundraising person, both the function. I mean, one person handling both the functions too. So that does happen, but we look into it more as we progress with the webinar. So first thing first, when it comes to leveraging communications for fundraising, where to get started? This is another common question that is often asked. First thing first, like just similar to the social media strategy or even the comm strategy, there needs to be a clear roadmap, especially for communications for fundraising. So this is how you look at it. It will be a subset of your overall strategy. It's not a must-have that you need to have a completely separate as well, but again, you can include it or incorporate it within your comm strategy to ensure that there is a cohesive approach in terms of both the functions functioning parallelly and yet achieving all the results through that. Now, how is it different from your overall strategy, if you ask? So this will be more focused and more streamlined towards your donor engagement pieces. It could be both from a potential or the new donors, or you're looking at existing donors that you're looking at. So all of these aspects need to be taken into consideration. Example, if you've entered a new partnership, maybe reach out to the donor and let them know that we'll be promoting this particular partnership on our social media channels, or maybe via emailers. So there are a different variety of areas where you will, of course, approach the donor first, let them know that this is something that we're looking at. And as a first step towards donor engagement, what you could also look at is request for their branding guidelines, request for their logos, so that you have a clear idea about, this is something that is available with me in my photo bank or the logo bank that I have, and I'm going to start promoting right away, so that there is a two-way communication again from the donor perspective as well. And the other part of it is, of course, there is no shame in requesting the donor for their support in terms of, say, for example, if you have tagged them in certain social media posts, request them, maybe, if they can share it across, or maybe what you can do is you can share the links with them once it's posted so that, some of them will notice it and they will post it on their individual pages as well. First and foremost, I think the LinkedIn aspect is something that I spoke about. This is the most pivotal role in terms of leveraging comms for fundraising. So there are a variety of ways, right from your regular donors, your traditional donors, to your HNIs, to everyone. So there are a variety of ways that you'll be looking at, but LinkedIn is a one-stop solution in terms of donor communication as an overall. And then, of course, lastly, what you need to do is, while devising the entire roadmap, it's important to sort of define the roles more clearly, because since both the functions run on parallel tracks, it's important to sort of define the roles clearly. What will be comms doing? What will be fundraising's approach towards these particular aims and objectives? So similarly, on that note, we do have one person on call who actually manages both the functions, and we'll be learning more about, how does she sort of juggle with both the functions and yet, achieves the results through that. We have Ishani from Barefoot Edu Foundation. So Ishani is online. Thank you, Ishani.
Thank you so much, Shrikant, for having me here. So I can hear me clearly, right?
Yes, it's breaking a bit, but it's audible now.
Shrikant, I'd just like to step in here.
Amazing.
Sorry.
We are almost at 4, and we have
Okay.
also taken the Q&A, so just time it out.
Sure. Will do. Ishani, you can hear us, right?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Ishani, I'll be quick in the interest of time, and also since the network is a little dodgy. First thing first, I want to understand from you, how do you sort of juggle both these functions, which are quite distinct, but yet have very similar aims? How do you juggle both?
I start off. I like to say like to inform the barefoot communication strategy at large. And what we do in a sense is train educators to provide meaningful education to children. So the goals for fundraising and communications are similar in the broader sense. In I would say, help build a strong brand. The simple answer to your question as to how I juggle between the two functions is that before the mentorship program, I was really struggling to do it, and I actually couldn't do both.
I'd just like to step in here. I can't understand what Ishani is saying. It's breaking a lot. Shrikant, if
Yes.
since it's breaking so much.
I think I'll take over on behalf of Ishani. I think what I got to know is about, from my experience of working with Ishani, I think the idea was that first thing first, she came up with a clear idea saying that one is, of course, fundraising was her clear role, the primary role. But again, communications is something that she was yearning to learn. Whereas, this is something through the project, the mentorship project overall. What we did is, first thing first, we sort of separated the two. We demarcated the lines very clearly to say that, this is what we're looking at from a communication strategy. Now, while having said that, they had a couple of overlaps. They had a couple of areas where they tied in together, and they tied it together quite seamlessly and beautifully as well. This was quite a learning for me as well through the entire process. So the idea was to ensure that, it's not just ensuring that the branding aspects of it, but also the fundraising aspects of it. So it was like ensuring that, there was a two-way functionality, and wherein, one hand talks to the other very clearly. So that was something that we were looking at. So this is where, Ishani came on board, and that point of time we realized that, this is something that was critical for the organization, because you're functioning on both the areas, but again, you need to sort of ensure that you are demarcating times as well. So just a bit of advice for everybody else.
Shrikant, we can move to the questions, understand the perspective of others
Sure.
also. Do you want me
Sure.
to read out the questions or you have them in
Um,
front of you?
Sunita, just one particular aspect of it, just this one slide that's pending. So
Sure.
cover that up quickly and then move on with the Q&A. Okay, great. So last thing last, I think one most important part of this particular webinar is one thing is to look at making communications a huge priority in every organization, because typically what happens is I've had a lot of colleagues in the past come up to me and say that, you know what, can you please pretty up this document for me? Or can you please design this document for me? So this is something that I just wanted to sort of reiterate and inform the audiences that one, it's very important that we also sort of stand very clear on this particular front, is that communications is not just a sort of a pretty up function as such. It's a lot more than that. We do have a lot of potential and we need to ensure that that is being emphasized at every aspect. So right from your strategy, right from your the social media aspects of it, or any promotion dissemination, you need to be very clear in the head saying that this is something that my function does. We're not just design. Design is, of course, just a 5% to a 10% aspect of it. There's a lot more. There is right from your media communications to your thought leadership to ensuring that there is a crisis communication aspect of it. So like we all touched upon a different variety of aspects, and there are buckets of information. I mean, like the tree over here, there are a variety of pieces that come under communications. So this is where you need to ensure that, communications is priority for every single organization, and also ensuring that, we have a united front in terms of especially other teams and other departments coming together and supporting us. So it's not just a team as such that is going to be doing one particular thing. So that is what I want to end with. Sunita, over to you for any questions or anything that have come by.
Yeah, we have Christine from Toy Bank. Her first question is, how do you plan in advance for ad hoc tasks?
So in terms of ad hoc tasks, what happens is typically you need to have a buffer. Now, when I mention about the strategy, there are campaigns, there are certain aspects of it, there are different categories to it, right? So in that case, what you will do is you'll refer a certain percentage of your time for ad hoc tasks. While you can't necessarily mention that this is the ad hoc task coming your way, but at least if there's a buffer to say that, this is a particular timeline for me. And say, for example, if you're creating a calendar or even the strategy overall, the metrics, the operational plan, you will ensure that there are a couple of pieces where you will factor in a couple of ad hoc tasks which will come your way. It could be something on the lines of maybe a new center or any particular organization or any sort of project that has been launched. In that case, how do you factor that in? So there is it's more from a time perspective. You need to allocate certain timelines to that. So that is how we'll go about it.
Yeah. The next question is that having pressure to stay up to date with all that is happening and posting on every thread relating to the social sector, would you like to share thoughts on how to prioritize what works best, and how do you track the trends that are that matter to your brand?
Right. I think, like I mentioned, right? I mean, first thing first, filter out what is most important to you. There would be times where you may not be able to access Instagram. There would be times where you may not be able to send out certain things. But there are certain hygiene factors that definitely need to go out. For example, an annual report cannot be delayed. For example, a newsletter cannot be delayed. So this is where you will set your strict non-negotiable timelines to ensure that this is what is happening. If in case, say for example, if you're not responded to an Instagram message or something, that's fine, that's excusable to some extent. But you need to divide your tasks based on what I can negotiate and what I cannot. So it's only based on that you will be able to segregate your work. And of course, most importantly, make your choice very clear. I mean, what are some of the platforms? What are some of the communication options that you're going to be present on? Only based on that, you will sort of set it in motion.
Next, what Shruti would like to know is, surely Shweta, is what is a good timeline to do a brand survey or measuring your brand awareness?
Okay. So when we're looking at timelines, so for example, it could be divided into first, are you doing it yourself? Or secondly, are you looking at it, doing it externally via an agency? Agencies will have a longer timeline and they will look at different audiences. Of course, there'll be costs involved. Now, when we're looking at internally, of course, there is a lot more control. Like, for example, the Muktangan team did a dipstick clearly to say that, they send out emails and a survey form to their donors, their partners, and even the other sort of mass and the audiences. Like, for example, if somebody's been on Facebook or certain aspects, they sent out the message very clear saying that, this is a form we're trying to find out where does our brand stand, and they've given a yes or a no sort of an option. So that gives you a clear picture where you are at. That, I would say internally it would approximately take about 3 or 4 months, whereas externally it could take longer also. It could take about 6 months because it will involve the entire package of, how are you branding it post that, because they will also look at closing the entire loop. So that will again come at additional costs.
The next question is for Shruti. Shruti, how big is your core communications group and how frequently do you all regroup for your feedback and inputs?
Yes. So our co-communications team is not a very big team. We have about seven of us from the resources and communications team, as well as the representatives from the program team. So what we do is basically we have these smaller circles now where uh, we have a school team. So we have whatever we present, whatever we discuss within the core communications team in terms of, okay, how are we going to progress? If we are strategizing for Twitter, then this is the strategy. If we are planning a campaign, then this is the outline of the campaign, and then we take it to the other circles also for their input. So we have a department leaders group where we present our ideas, they give their inputs. We have a school team, because in that way we get everybody's perspectives, and that really helps us in getting an understanding of how do we communicate this to the external world. Because when we are communicating, it's very important that everybody's feedback is looped in, and we try to do this as frequently as possible, though sometimes it might not be that you can do it every time, like on an every week basis. But we have our core team meetings at least twice a month, where we come together, we discuss what's working, what's not working. And generally a lot of people are also active on other social media platforms, so they have ideas to share, that okay, you could do the reels this way maybe, or we could look at Facebook lives, we could organize a chat on one of the topics. So they give their inputs and their ideas all the time.
Thanks. We'll take up two more questions. After that, we'll go offline. Shrikant, you can share your responses and then we'll share it with the team. Yeah. The next question is, how do you understand how many resources to hire in the comms department, and what should be your expectation from one content writer or designer, and how big should the team be?
Correct. I think there are different combinations and responses will vary as per each organization. Typically, I think most of our organizations do have just two or maybe one resource within the comms team because it's always a one-man army. So in that case, what I would say that the ideal situation would be a minimum of 4 would be ideal, but it's something that we can only dream of in certain organizations, and it's a nice to have because you can split your specialities based on your team responsibilities. It could be something like somebody looks at PR specifically, somebody who looks at design specifically, and then you have content. So all these specialities could be divided within your comms team as such. So that would be ideal case scenario, but that doesn't necessarily happen.
Okay, I think that also answers the next question. So I'll just move away from that. And for donor engagement through emails, which portal would you recommend for sending out bulk emails?
So for bulk emails, I think the most trusted source is MailChimp for now, because MailChimp is something that you can look at about 500 to 1,000 email recipients. You can send it for free. So you can look at MailChimp. You have other options which are Constant Contact. And most importantly, what you need to look at is there are a lot of non-profit based benefits that you receive from all these portals, be it MailChimp, be it or any sort of Canva design software as well. All of these pieces, once you submit your NGO-based information like the certification and other things, will offer you the premium services at no cost. So you can explore those options as well.
I think this is the good time to wrap up. What I'd only ask everyone is to please share your feedback. The link is there on the chat. And again, to reassure you, whatever questions have been asked, but we haven't been able to take it up, we'll get back to everybody with responses for those questions and also a recording of the video.
Thank you.
Please share your feedback.
Thank you so much, Sunita. Thank you, Shruti. Thank you, Shani.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.